Good evening. It's good to see all your great faces out there. Did you have a good dinner? Yeah. Well, I'm going to give a brief introduction before my voice completely runs out, but I want to tell you the word to think about with this introduction is leadership. On a screen behind me, you see a plaque. I took that picture about 4 years ago, not too long after we dedicated the U.S. Embassy for the first time in Jerusalem, the capital of the state of Israel. Now, why that's important is because politicians for years, if not decades, said they were going to move the embassy of the United States from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, the capital, the seat of power, where the prime minister's at, where the Knesset's at, where the seat of government is in the state of Israel. They said they were going to move it, and in the end, a bunch of bureaucrats in the State Department said, oh, you're going to have blood in your hands, you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do that. First and foremost, President Donald Trump deserves credit because he was the first president to actually make that happen. But the reason why I show you that plaque, his name's up there, Vice President Pence is up there, but you see one other really important name. It was the 70th Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. And that's because there was a Secretary of State before him. I won't go into too much detail, but he actually stood in the way of the president being able to deliver on that promise. It's a good reminder that leadership matters, not just in elected office, but in an appointed office along the way. And for all of you, not just in the highest offices of the land, but leadership matters even on your campuses, even in your communities, even in your own households. Mike Pompeo, our special guest, has always been a leader. He's first in his class at the United States Military Academy. He was a leader on the battlefield at the end of the Cold War in the midst of some of the most intense areas in the middle of Europe. He was a leader when he stepped up and led not one but two manufacturing companies, caring for not only his employees but the families that were part of that good and wholesome work that's involved with manufacturing. And then, like he did when he took the oath of office as a member of the United States Army, he stood up and answered that call again, not once, not twice, but 4 times as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives from the great state of Kansas. And then when President Trump asked him to serve again in a different capacity, he was the director of the Central Bureau, or the CIA. I was going to say the Bureau, but it's not a bureau out there. We're just talking about FBI a minute ago, but the CIA stepped up and led that as well. And as I mentioned, not initially, but when this nation, not just this president, needed the most, he stepped up to be the 70th Secretary of the great United States. But along the way, he's been a great husband, a great father, and as I've kidded him before when we spoke on events for Young America's Foundation, probably one of his most important leadership role was when he and his wife decided to be Sunday school teachers for 5th graders. He's learned to be a leader at every step of the way. He's going to tell you some important lessons about leadership tonight. Let's give him a warm welcome to the 70th Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo.
Thank you all. Thanks, everyone. Go Army. All right. You know, as I look out at this room tonight, I think of all that applause, and I think most of you are going, this is like, I'm applauding so much because you're one Republican who said he wasn't going to run for president, so God bless you, right? Scott, thanks for the very kind introduction. Thanks for getting my pronouns right. Appreciate that. And your mention of 5th grade Sunday school, reminded me, like, I have had this incredible privilege. I've had the chance to serve as a tank platoon leader. I was a member of my homeowners association board. I've been in lots of tough places in my life. But if you can teach 5th grade Sunday school, Chairman Kim's got nothing on you. Like, you can confront anyone if you can keep a 5th grader in their seat for an hour. Tonight I'll share some comments, and then I'll spend a lot of time listening to you and taking questions, talking about the things that are on your mind. But there are just a few things that I think are so important, especially for the young people who are in the audience tonight, who who I'm sure as you've had other leaders come speak to you, you've heard them, but I want to give you a practitioner's view of this. Because my life has been filled with incredible opportunities. I had a chance to go to Harvard Law School and to West Point, where I got a fantastic education. But frankly, the things I learned the most were from the people who I've spent time with. The young people, my peers, my bosses, who I was able to learn from and see from and experience things from. And so when we talk about the world, whether it's some of the silliness that's taking place in our schools today or the challenges abroad, you should know, and Governor Walker and I were talking about this, in the end, the question becomes, can you execute? Can you deliver? Theory is fantastic, but practitioners have that additional burden. Some of the folks here tonight run businesses. It's great to talk about marginal cost and all of that. What really matters is, can you build teams? Can you convince customers that your product is worthy? And in the same way as Secretary of State, can you convince your adversaries that the things you say you really mean? We didn't have the advantage of having a media that had the wind at our backs. How's that for diplomatic speak? It reminds me, I'd been the Secretary of State for like a couple months, and consecutive days, the New York Times ran a headline. It was Thomas Friedman, and a headline, worst Secretary of State ever. Yeah, okay. The next day, it was David Ignatius at the Washington Post, same headline, so clearly coordinated. Worst Secretary of State ever. My son, Nick, calls me the next day. He knows I'm pretty tough, but he thought, wow, that's like Dad might be suffering. I call him. And he said, Dad, I did some research, and there's this fellow named Elihu Washburn, and he was the Secretary of State for 11 days. Surely you're better than him. And so kids will both keep you humble and keep you going. So we actually, to this day, have this thing called We're Number Two. It's a little club he and I have joined. We worked on things that mattered. Our focus every day was trying to keep each and every one of you safe. And I hope as we move through this campaign season that that'll be what you demand as well. I hope what we will all demand as we move through this political process is that we ask candidates, not just presidential candidates, candidates for Senate, candidates for school board, candidates for district attorney, candidates all across the country. I hope we will ask them hard questions about the things they intend to do. What is it you will do that will matter in my life? What is it you will do to put my city in a better place, or your county, or to keep crime off the streets in our urban environments? I hope we'll focus less on Twitter or X or whatever the heck it's called. I hope we'll focus on the things that actually deliver. And that's where I thought I'd spend a few minutes and then take questions. What are those things? These are things that are timeless. You're a part here at YF. You all do amazing work because you focus on things that matter, things that are timeless. We know the institutions that matter. Don't let them gaslight you. I joked about pronouns, right? We know there's two genders. Like, I get it. My son lives in a pretty contested space too. Don't let him on your campus talk about the fact that it's not clear how many genders there are. Tonight, I think tomorrow night you're gonna have Riley Gaines here. Like, we should pretty much just keep men in men's sports. Like, this is not hard. Don't let them fool you. Don't let them obliterate you. Don't let them tell you, well, no, you don't really understand. No, you get it. You understand. It was great to see the Supreme Court say they finally understood what equality meant as well. This is an imperative. And I know so many YF alumni who were part of that, in that fight, not just at the Supreme Court, but in states all across America, who were working to create equality, who were working to create programs where kids could go to schools, in the schools we'd want kids to go in, right? A place you'd want your son or your granddaughter, a school that was worthy of him or of her. And you're not going to throw them into some crappy school in some place and let Randy Weingarten tell you what they should be learning. We're going to have parents have the capability of doing that and the authority to do that. We're going to recognize that deeply. Now, you may be surprised that I started the conversation tonight talking about things that matter here at home. But when you're the Secretary of State, there are two rules. The first rule is don't promise anything your boss hasn't told you can promise. I was mindful. I was introduced as the 70th Secretary of State. Donald Trump was the 45th president. So that meant I knew there was more turnover in my gig than his. And so I was deeply mindful that I was not the President of the United States. I was his emissary. I was his chief diplomat. I was his senior spy as the CIA director. We were aiming to achieve the outcomes that the people of America had commanded him to do. The second thing you have to make sure is you just never lose the theme. You never lose the mission set that drove you to do the things you said you would do. And for us, we knew if you don't get it right at home, the chance that you can deliver security for America is near zero. I was a young soldier, like before most of you were born, a long time ago. But I was a soldier, and I knew we mattered, that I mattered for the State Department to have a good military, and it does. We need to have the strongest, most capable, most lethal fighting force in the world. And so we should focus a little less on DEI. We should focus a little less on making sure that all of our military vehicles are carbon neutral by 2040, which as a tanker just makes me laugh. I just imagine like I'm in the battlefront, we're driving through the lines, and I'm looking for a charging station. Frightening. But in the end, it is the broad mass of American people delivering American power through its economy and through its people, and the central understandings of our founders. If we get those things wrong, if the American economy doesn't grow at 2 or 3 or 4%, not just 0.6%, and if the American people walk away from our founding traditions, the 72nd or 73rd or 74th Secretary of State won't have a prayer. Let's just look at this in today's world. Without a strong, capable American economy, the Ukrainian people would be suffering even more than they are today. It has mattered that we have had the wherewithal to deliver them the tools and the weapon systems they have needed to defend their own sovereignty at enormous cost to the Ukrainian people. It's cost us money, taxpayer money. There's no doubt about that. But tens of thousands of Ukrainians have lost their lives, and each one of their families will suffer for that forever. But they did it because they had a central idea that said invading another sovereign nation and destroying its infrastructure and killing civilians is indecent. And we must make sure we protect it. For America it matters. For America it matters for a couple reasons. One of them is we just always try to do the right thing. That's good. That's important. But as Gene Kirkpatrick said, you know, sometimes you have to work with bad guys too. But Ukraine matters to the United States of America. Imagine if Vladimir Putin in control in Kyiv or Warsaw, or the capitals of the Baltic nations. If you go back and look at his statements over the last 25 years, that is Vladimir Putin's statements, his intentions weren't limited to this one piece of land known as Ukraine. They were deeper and bigger. And for anyone who doesn't think for a moment that Xi Jinping in China isn't watching to see whether the world still has what the world has always had, if you think he is not watching to see whether we are good on our word and prepared to defend things that matter to the American people, I think we're just sadly mistaken. And frankly, too many in my party, too many in the Republican Party have adopted a different view of that. I think that's an enormous mistake. I wish it weren't the case that America had to lead. I wish it was the case that we could sit back and enjoy life and drink pina coladas and just relax. But sadly, the very freedom that is part of the name of this organization depends on American leadership. Not just American leadership to keep others free, but to keep ourselves free as well. It doesn't mean, and we in the Trump administration were good about this, it does not mean sending the 82nd Airborne every time there's a problem someplace in the world. It simply means understanding that there is a place for American leadership, and properly executed, you can deter our adversaries without ever having to send a MAGTF or our young boys and girls to risk their lives. We did it. I must say, we'll never get credit for the fact that Vladimir Putin did not invade Europe on our watch. I get asked all the time. I get asked all the time, like, would this have happened if you were still there? And I say, did you see the pictures of me at the end? Like, I was done. Like, that's the end of my time. But the truth is, I can't prove whether it would have happened. If President Trump were here to sit at night, he'd say, no, there's no way it wouldn't happen. I'm a little, yeah, that's not, I've spent a lot of time with him. I can even do a better impression. I have an impression of Donald Trump doing Chairman Kim that is just killer. And yeah, exactly. No, not tonight. Not tonight. It's gonna be in a bar someplace. Not tonight. Not here. Not here tonight. But here's what I can say for certainty, that he didn't invade Europe on our watch. That's factually true. He took a fifth of Ukraine under President Obama. He didn't take an inch for 4 years, and he went right back at it. And he went right back at it because he did not have confidence that the United States of America would do the right thing at the right moment for the right reason. In the same way I think he feared we would have done. That's the execution of deterrence in the finest tradition of President Reagan. We flipped the script in China, too. For 50 years, we'd been engaging more with them. And I brook no ill will towards the Chinese people. I actually pray for them. I pray for the Chinese people that America will do the right thing and continue to confront Xi Jinping and his Communist Party. It was a big fight inside the State Department to say, nope, engagement has run its course. It no longer is working for us. And we began to challenge what had been a war on America for at least 25 years, perhaps as many as 40. Millions of American jobs destroyed, a virus foisted on the world that killed millions of people. We could see that Xi Jinping was a different cat, a different kind of leader there, and his intentions weren't just to hold 1 million of his own people in concentration camps. That's bad enough. That's troubling enough that many American businesses should rethink what they are doing in that place. But his intentions were global, they were hegemonic, and his effort to describe America as a country in decline was not just observational, it was his effort. He wants America to be in decline. He wants to tell his stories. You should know he's doing so on TikTok, even as we speak. Telling stories about China as a rising power and America as a failed has-been of a country. I don't believe that for a second. But I also don't believe that it is an a priori conclusion that it will forever be so. It will continue to take effort and sacrifice and work for us to continue to confront what is the first power since at least the Soviet Union that ever had the chance to change the way we live here in America. And so I won't spend a lot of time talking about it, but know this much: we must get this right. It is not impossible. There are many problems inside of China today, and we should stoke them. And we should do all that we can. Because when we get this right, we won't have to go fight them. When we get this right, they won't invade Taiwan. When we get this right, they won't bribe African leaders. When we get this right, they won't run a surveillance state inside of their own country that is unrivaled in civilizational history. You know, I think about so many Chinese Americans today who are being touched on the streets, having Chinese people walk up to them and ask them, how is your cousin doing back in Xinjiang? Asking them, how is your uncle? Chinese students studying at our finest universities, and having the Chinese government ask them when they come home, what is it you're studying? And you should know, we know where your uncle is. These are the kinds of things that threaten civilizations. And we benefited enormously from the civilization that exists today and the rules that exist on the global stage. We have to continue to protect them, and we have to continue to be the greatest nation in the history of that civilization. I'm convinced that we will be. I'm convinced that you all aren't going to let the left gaslight you. I am convinced that we will continue to do all of these things that are needed. We have this very special place. When I was a cadet, first day, show up, they give you a rifle, a uniform, and the Federalist Papers. I loved my uniform, my rifle's cool, but the Federalist Papers I still have. Read them. Xi Jinping doesn't want you reading them. He doesn't want you to understand the greatness of the nation in which we live. One more headline, and then I'll take questions. So this headline appeared just as I was leaving the administration, and New York Times reporter ran this headline, And I'd been working on religious freedom issues, and I was unembarrassed to speak about my faith and its centrality to how I thought about America's place in the world. And so the headline for the New York Times was, Mike Pompeo, God's diplomat. And I remember thinking, it does not get any better than that. And then I read the article and realized that there was this fundamental misunderstanding about who we are as a Judeo-Christian nation and how it is we deliver good outcomes, not only for our own people, but people all across this world. I am confident that we will get it right. I am long America. I believe deeply that we'll get another 250 good years. And I believe it because of nights like tonight and the opportunity to be with people like you who come together in community around these central ideas. Thank you for doing that. For those of you who underwrite it and help it, bless you. For those of you who volunteer your time, bless you even more. And for those of you who are here learning and gathering and building out friends as part of this network, stay at the fight. Don't let them walk you off the target. We'll win. Thank you all very much. Thank you all. All right. Thank you all. Who's got a question? Is there a microphone somewhere?
Thank you, Secretary Pompeo. Yeah, we're going to
Where
start
are we
with
at?
Q&A.
Over here?
Students back there, you guys already got the deal.
right.
Supporters, please stay in your seat. Just raise your hand. We'll have our running mic over there come to you. We're going to start off with a student question.
Great.
So.
Hi, thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Ashley Cope. I'm a student at California Lutheran University in California, obviously. I wanted to ask you, what are relations like with North Korea now, and what do you think they should look like in the future? Should there be U.S. intervention in any way?
Oh my goodness, thank you for the question, young lady. What are relations like? I don't even know how to answer where to begin. So I spent so much time on this file. The most amazing trip of my time in service was when the first trip when I was a CI director to Pyongyang, and I met Chairman Kim for the first time. It was a clandestine trip. Nobody knew. It was Easter weekend of 2018. And I remember thinking, I'm going to have Easter service with Chairman Kim, like that mind-bending. It was equally mind-bending because Otto Warmbier had just been returned home, only to die from having been held in captivity there. But the president had given a very clear mission. It was to convince Chairman Kim that life would be better for him if he gave up his nuclear weapons. And of course, we ultimately failed. We had 3 summits. One of my single biggest failures, I think, was the second summit in Hanoi. I just read it wrong, and I put the president in a bad place, something a Secretary of State should never do. But as much as we got pieces wrong, we had convinced the North Koreans not to continue their missile testing program for long-range missiles. We got home the remains of 50 folks who had fought and died there, which was pretty special to be part of. I was able to bring 3 American hostages home, which may be the greatest achievement personally for me during my time as Secretary of State. To see these 3 Christian men climb on this airplane and get them out of what was surely hell was just, it's emotional even to speak about today. But we didn't change Chairman Kim. Unfortunately, the Biden administration came in, and he's now back launching missiles. Now the soldier crossed the border a week and change ago, so more hostages still there. It's a very difficult problem because 27 million people live in the most destitute possible way, and 2 million people live in abundance in the city of Pyongyang, and Chairman Kim wants to keep it that way. And he is under the boot of Xi Jinping in China as well. So it is an incredibly difficult problem set, one that we all have to be mindful of because they possess a very capable nuclear system and long-range missiles that can deliver them to places that we wouldn't want them to land. I wish I had a better answer other than if we can solve the problem with Xi Jinping, the North Korean problem will go away pretty quickly as well. Thank you for your question, ma'am.
Well, Mr. Secretary, my name is Christian Calvert, and I attend the University of Alabama. Roll Tide.
Wow, that's a lot of Alabamans.
You've served our country in several different capacities as a soldier, director of the CIA, and as Secretary of State. I just wanted to ask, between all those positions, what work are you the most proud of?
Oh my goodness, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about that. You know, I often think about the things I didn't get right more, like I was just speaking to. there's not much better than being CIA director. And I can't tell you about all the greatness, but trust me, it's there. Yeah. By the way, I often get asked that question differently. I often get asked, are there UFOs? And my answer is, we have bigger problems. I loved what I did in each of those places, and we had good moments. The work that we did in the Middle East to build out what became the Abraham Accords meant that fewer young people have to go fight and die in the Middle East. That was my mission every day, right? The State Department was keep the Department of Defense from having to do the thing I'm supposed to be doing. We're the front line for deterrence. If we get it right, we don't have to put people in a bad place. And the work that we did there in the Middle East, I think will be lasting and will create prosperity there, and it will protect our one ally, our friend in the nation of Israel, in ways that are really important and give them a chance to have, right? So in 1948, they'll get a chance to have 70 plus more years of existence as well. I'm counting on it, not only through our good work, but God's watching that place too. So if you said, what's the one thing, it'd be the fact that we were able to flip the switch on China and begin to get the country to focus on that, and the work we did in the Middle East. And then a couple of cool operations at the CIA too.
We're now going to take a question from a supporter.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for coming.
I see. Yes, sir.
Yes. Hi, my name is Jackson. And one, do you regret the deal that you made with the Taliban, especially given the chaotic withdrawal that happened under President Biden? And two, who do you plan to support in 2024?
Well, I'll answer the first one, but not the second one. I plan to support in 2024 the Republican nominee, whoever it may be, because I am reasonably certain that person will make life better for my children and grandchildren than whoever the Democrats put up. So that seems like a layup. As for the first one, I don't regret at all the policies that we put forth with respect to Afghanistan. We got the right end of the stick there. President Trump campaigned. He tweeted like 50 times, "We're getting out of Afghanistan." From literally, maybe on day one, but day two, the president would literally, "Mike, we're not getting out fast enough." I was CI director. We had a big footprint in Afghanistan in addition to the uniformed military folks there. And he wanted out. And frankly, he was right. It was time after 20 years to begin to work our way out of that. But we were never able, and we did. We got from about 15,000 uniformed folks to about 2,800 by the time we left. But even in the last months, the president would say, "Mike, we need to get everybody out." And I would say, "Mr. President, if we can do this. We can absolutely get everybody out. We'll fly in some airplanes and put them on the plane, we'll get them out." It will end badly. And I can now prove that because we saw what happened when you do that. And so I could never look the president in the eye and tell him, "Mr. President, if we get everybody out, we will, still have the capacity to prevent terror from rising up there again. Second, we'll get all the Americans out safely. We'll get our equipment out in large part. And fourth, you'll have something that looks like stability, Afghan-level stability." Like, those are the four things that we, for 4 years, talked about, and we never got to where we could do it. The negotiations with the Taliban were part of that. In the end, much like Ukraine and Russia, there will be a negotiation. There'll be a deal. And we were trying to figure out what the outlines of the deal would look like. They were terrorists. These are bad guys. But in the end, they were going to be the Taliban are going to be living in Afghanistan. We needed to find a way forward. But it's interesting to listen to the Biden administration say, well, it was that agreement that caused this failure. And much like Ukraine, I'd say, really? Well, why didn't it happen on our watch? We didn't pull a stunt. We didn't pick 9/11 as the day we're going to withdraw. We didn't tell the bad guys what we were going to do. We began a methodical effort to get our young men and women home. And 4 more years, I can't promise you if we would have gotten everyone out. I don't know. But we were determined to reduce our risk from that place, including the risk to our own soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. And we did that. And we did it pretty effectively for 4 years. And we kept, as we drew down from 15,000 to 2,800, as we drew down, we had Afghan stability. They knew. I'll never forget, right? We signed the agreement, and 2 weeks later, they did something they weren't allowed to do. We went and whacked a bunch of them, right? This is like basic, this is deterrence 101. And I'll never forget, Mullah Baradar reaches out to me and he says, hey, your Air Force flew last night against us. And I said, yeah. And he said, they violated provision 375 or whatever the heck it was. He said, no, they didn't. And I said, do you want me to bring you the satellite photos? Right? And he's like, yeah, never mind. We understood how to keep deterrence, and President Biden unfortunately pulled the last pin out of the Jenga stack and got 13 Americans killed and left a bunch of folks behind that we should never have left behind, and that is a tragedy. I never talk about Afghanistan without this last thought, though. I'm sure many in this room served. A lot of you would have family members who served in Afghanistan. They're pretty down because of the way this unfolded, the way the ultimate withdrawal unfolded. I get that. Don't be down. I watched, as CI director, I watched American lives saved by our presence in Afghanistan. There are Americans alive tonight because of the work our soldiers, our sailors, our airmen and Marines did for 20 years in Afghanistan, and everyone who served there should be damn proud of what it is they did.
Good evening, Secretary. My name is Adria from the University of Exeter. I'm originally from Barcelona, Catalonia. And my question is, in regards to your experience, your incredible experience, and everything you've lived, and bearing in mind the U.S. history, fighting for freedom since the Declaration of Independence until now, what do you think should be the U.S. position in regards to self-determinating countries such as Catalonia or Scotland?
Oh, goodness. So you have probably a dozen of these around the world, some varying configuration. And for the most part, the United States should say, y'all figure it out. And I'm not trying to slough this off. There will be times, we had one in Morocco with Polisario and Western Sahara where we got a little bit involved. But for the most part, if you believe that sovereign nations ought to be sovereign, then in fact it ought to be the case that the people of those countries should resolve these things themselves. That is the rule. And you might be able to walk me off that and find an exception, but it's a pretty hard rule. And I would certainly say that's true for Spain and for most of the other places. We had plenty of challenges in the world without trying to intervene and solve long historical disputes that were deeply held. By the way, this was amongst friends and allies like Spain, right? I mean, the conflict between the South Koreans and the Japanese over their history was deep and difficult. And we all know the issues between Armenia and Azerbaijan, right? With the history there. These are complex problem sets, and America should step very lightly in these spaces to permit time and the people who have the cultural awareness and the situation, and the people who are going to have to live with that outcome for decades, we should let them figure their way through it in almost every instance. By the way, it's not in those cases that we don't have preferences for the outcome that we'd like to see. We almost always do. But that doesn't, the fact that we have a preference doesn't mean that it's correct for U.S. policy to step in and try and Bigfoot the darn thing. Yes, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Secretary. My name is Alexander. I'm a student at the Catholic University of America here in Washington, D.C. You were obviously Secretary of State under President Trump. Secretary Blinken under President Biden seems to be getting rolled by pretty much every adversary that we have. What happened? How do we get back to a point of, being taken seriously by these countries and not essentially being laughed at?
Yeah. Oh, goodness. In the end, what's the right way to put it? In the end, presidents matter. I was really blessed. I got it. Everybody's got their view of President Trump. He is a walking Rorschach test. Like, I get it. Like, I live the dream every day. But he was a great president to work for. And because while, I mean, he didn't come with a deep national security background, right? He was a real estate guy from Brooklyn, right? He did understand American power. And he understood the things America ought to use it on and the things America ought not to use it on deeply. He understood that intrinsically. And so that gave me a lot of space to go build. And so I was very fortunate. I had built his trust as CI director. most important thing you have as a Secretary of State. When you meet with the President of Mexico or the Prime Minister of Israel or the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia, the only coin you have is the fact that they believe that you're speaking on behalf of the boss. And once you're not, once they, as Secretary Baker told me, he says, Mike, once somebody believes that you're not acting as the president's diplomat, you're freelancing, you're just a dude on vacation, right? And we never did that. And I watched with President Biden and that same level of leadership, that same capacity to translate to Secretary Blinken in the way that President Trump allowed me to go out. I don't think Secretary Blinken has the benefit of that. I'll give you one more challenge Secretary Blinken has that I didn't have. 2 words, ready? John Kerry. It's a little bit funny, but it's not good when you're walking around the State Department and somebody shouts, Mr. Secretary, and you're not sure if it's you. And it's really a mess to have done that and put this envoy who's talking about the thing that's most important to this administration. What do they lead with in foreign policy? Climate change, right? Everything is through the prism of climate change. That makes the Secretary of State's role incredibly difficult. And so I don't know. I don't know what changed other than it is the case that leaders around the world, our friends are worried we won't be with them, and our adversaries are a little more confident that they can act in a way that'll put America on its back foot. And that's a dangerous place to be. And it's why I've applauded President Biden for what he has done so far in Ukraine, and frankly, am disappointed that he didn't do more, faster, better, and we'd have this thing over today. But weakness begets danger. That's true every time.
Good evening, Mr. Secretary. Thank you for being with us. My name is Ben Reese. I'm a student at Franciscan University of Steubenville. And I had a question about terrorism. I was wondering if you could give me what you would define terrorism as, and if you would label the Mexican drug cartels as terrorist organizations.
Oh, goodness. Terrorism is pretty easy. It's the use of force to achieve a political end, and there is no doubt that these cartels are terrorists. There's no doubt about it. Attorney General Barr and I had begun to work on this very problem set. We had actually laid out, here's another way to come at this problem set. What's the difference between a cartel leader and a jihadi? It's not a joke. The answer is almost none. One might put religion a little bit higher, or at least pretend to put religion a little bit higher, but they're both stealing. They're both using kinetic force to subjugate people. They're willing to kill people to achieve their ends. They're all collecting taxes. Jihadist organization cartels look almost identical from a security perspective, and we've treated them differently for a long time. That can no longer be the case, and so Attorney General Barr and I had begun to work to address the risk from Mexican cartels in the same way we addressed terrorism in Afghanistan. Think about this. Everybody knows that it's almost a truism, right? That terror trains in places that are ungoverned spaces, where there's no rule of law, there's no police force, there's no sheriff's office, there's no state police. Those ungoverned spaces for America for a long time have been 6,000 miles away. And now we have massive ungoverned space on our southern border. And so that risk is very real. And a Mexican government that doesn't have the capacity to take down these cartels for a host of reasons. And so we're going to have to do it. Or demand that the Mexican government does, or work alongside the Mexican government to achieve that. So the very same model that we use to do counterterrorism for so long begins with intelligence collection, begins with operational excellence in the field to understand what's really going on, and then goes to host nation governments and says, here's what we know, here's how we know it, here's what we're expecting you to do, and tries to coach them onto the target. And when they don't, I'm trying to be polite, we do self-help. We protect America, and I think we're getting close to having to do that at our southern border today.
Good evening, Secretary. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. My name is Ian Georgiev, and I'm an alumni from the University at Buffalo in Buffalo, New York. And I just wanted to ask you about the Belt and Road Initiative. So we hear a lot from African nations that there isn't trust in America the same way these nations trust China. They want them to be there, they want their help, they want them to build their infrastructure. So how do we get African nations to trust us instead of China?
Yeah. I think I disagree with the predicate of your question. I've never met anyone who trusts China. Right? They may be on the take, they may get money from them, they may be given bridges for free, but this will all collapse. And they don't trust China, they're benefiting from China. And often it's the leaders of those African countries, not the people of those countries, that are actually benefiting. I've never seen anybody who says, man, when I'm in trouble, I want the Chinese to come save me. Just never seen it. Might happen 10 years from now, but it's just, right? No, who do you want? Who do you want to come help you when you're in trouble? When you've got a flood, or you've had an earthquake, or you've got some alien invader coming to your country, right? Who do you want to come help you? Nobody says, I think I'm going to fly to Beijing and see if I can get the Chinese Marines to show up. Like, I mean, it's just, so when you say trust them, I don't think that's it at all. The real question is, how do we convince them that America can be a reliable partner? And that is harder than it sounds, because we're not going to show up with money in brown paper bags, right? It's just not how we roll. And we shouldn't roll that way. And so we show up and say, no, we're going to help you figure out how to make your crops drought resistant. That's good and interesting, but you know, if you are an African leader and you just want to maintain power and you like your palace, you know, maybe you choose something different. This takes time, but I'm convinced our model works. And the Chinese model that they're using, not only in Africa, but using it in South America as well, using it in Southeast Asia as well, that the mercantilist model of using their economy to gain political power in those places, I think will fail epically, and it's just a question of time. And as we move through, we should do the things we can to convince these countries that America is a better partner. I'll give you one more example from our time that's a good one, because it's frustrating. I would see it too. I traveled to Africa, I traveled these places and say, what on earth are you doing? And they'd say, hey, the Chinese gave us Huawei. Like, I need internet for my people, and they gave it to us. And you'd stare at them, they go, I know. Right? I wouldn't really say it, but they know, they ain't given anything. They're in debt up to their ears to these guys. And by the way, they know every single thing that gets said in the country is being monitored by the Chinese state police back in Beijing. And so they know there's no gifts, there's nothing free. And you go on the internet, it ain't free, right? There's somebody tracking what you're doing, what you're saying. And by the way, it's not the government, it's, you know, Facebook or TikTok, worse yet. And so the answer is we got to play the long game. We were in a meeting with a African leader. I won't say which country. And President Trump, there were 4 or 5 of us on our side and Sam on their side, including Secretary Mnuchin and their finance minister. And President Trump said, how much money do we provide you in assistance every year? And the president of the country turned to his right, and the finance minister gave him a number, and he says, $1 million. And the finance minister shouts, $1.1 million, and I kept thinking, dude, you're going to get fired. like, just be quiet. I'm sorry, $1 billion, $1.1 billion. And President Trump says, oh. And President Trump, knowing the answer to this question, said, how much of your agriculture do you buy from us? And he turned to his agriculture minister, and the answer was none. And I remember President Trump turning to Secretary Perdue saying, we're chumps, right? We provide them $1 billion a year and don't ask the simple thing in return that they purchase their produce from American producers, or at the very least, Western producers, right? If not us, the Europeans or our allies and friends. We have many tools with which we could exert American influence in these places, and we ought to use them in a way that is much more robust than we have done for an awfully long time. And this is not political. Neither party has actually begun to challenge China in the way that we had, and this is how you push back and actually help these African countries get to a better place.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Secretary. Thank you for being here. My name is Parker Boggs. I go to James Madison University, right down the road in Virginia. I wanted to ask you, you're in a room with hundreds of conservative students here, and all of us, if we haven't heard it ourselves, there's definitely other peers that have heard professors, students that have said, you know, America is not the best country to live in. Socialism is the best way of a system that we can have as our government instead of capitalism, let's say that. You have the resume to help us answer this question, I should say. How do we go back to our campuses and how do we answer this question to peers, professors, everything, to say that capitalism is the best way and the best economic system we could ask for our country? And how do we say that America is the shining light on the hill and is the best country we could ask for?
Yeah, you know the answer to that. Say it. By the way, say it full-throatedly and with a big smile and put your arm around them and love them, even though they're foolish. It's okay, you can love them. Look, capitalism has raised more people out of poverty than any other system that man has ever created as an economic matter. The rule of law matters. It matters most, frankly, for the least amongst us. Now, you can also say, and you know, sometimes things just get out of whack, and sometimes our political leaders have corporate capture and some of the big companies do things. You don't have to describe this system as perfect, but there's nothing that compares to it. I must say, I too see this. I see young people who speak this way, and having had this chance now to serve, there is no greater privilege than the blue passport you have. And I can't tell you how many hundreds of millions of people in the world want that. You should ask them the same question I did. Ask them how many people they know that are trying to emigrate to Shanghai, right? I mean, this is if you're asking which system is best, I think human freedom flourishes and people do choose the place in which they live. We could all move to someplace else and they'd probably take us in many cases. What Ukrainian today is trying to move to Moscow? Right? Putin tells us this story. He has this narrative that says these are Russians and they want to be under Russian leadership. Really? I actually know where people are moving. There are people leaving Russia to try and get to Europe. These are facts, and we should be absolutely fearless in speaking to these facts. And as for America's place in the world, I can't imagine anybody seriously making an argument that there has been any nation that has sacrificed more of its own treasure and people to achieve good outcomes on behalf of others than the people of the United States of America. I was last night, I was telling Governor Walker, my niece and nephew were in town these last 2 days, and so I played tourist here in Washington, which was a lot of fun. To be the former secretary, touring is hilarious. But you know, last night we went out and walked the monuments. So we went up to see the great Kansan Eisenhower with the new monument, and then we headed up the road and walked from Korea to Lincoln over to the Vietnam Memorial. Just ask them to go visit those places. Say, come on, we're all gonna go see this. You can't walk past those places. There's no equivalent of one of those in any other country in the world where so many people have done so much to make this world a better place. And so I think in some sense, you're not going to convince someone who's a stalwart who has decided to disbelieve reality. But for a lot of young people, they just simply are uninformed. And the task that you all have, that each of us have, is to try and cheerily, and with the best humor of Ronald Reagan, with the best smile and love in your heart, as a person of faith, just deliver them the cold facts. And when you do, over some period of time, I think most folks will get it. You're not going to convince the faculty at Berkeley, but you can get everybody else. Thank you for the question.
Good evening.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much for coming and speaking to us. And I would also like to thank you and the former president for conducting the Abraham Accords. It means a lot to my friends. It means a lot to my family, as a lot of them are in Israel, and they're living under a better situation. That being said, the current administration and the current administration over in Israel are causing a lot of issues with, and also on the Palestinian side, they're causing a lot of issues, and the tensions are becoming much more inflammatory, and peace is looking to be very difficult in these times. Do you see a path? Do you see a viable path for a two-state solution? And if so, like how do you see it growing?
Oh goodness. So I don't want to comment necessarily on the stuff that's going on there today, other than democracies are rambunctious, and Israel is a democracy, and they should be proud of this rambunctiousness. They're going to go argue, and they're going to debate, and they're going to go to the streets. That's all good, right? This is not. We shouldn't walk away from that. I find this encouraging that people care enough. And by the way, they're all going out with Israeli flags on both sides, trying to figure their way through this thing. And then they'll pass legislation, they'll have an election, and they'll do what democracies do. You know, I heard someone today. I heard him on TV lamenting what's happening in Israel. Says, "Oh, they passed this new law by a slim majority." And I remember watching the Affordable Care Act pass. Right? One vote, arm twist, you know, careful, glass houses and all. You know, as for how do you achieve peace between folks living in the West Bank and Israel, I know only this. There is no chance that with the Palestinian Authority in control that you can ever get a peace between those two groups. You will end up with Hamas just like the Gaza Strip. It's just who they are. I pray their leadership will change. When it does, you can imagine something that looks very different from today. But the folks running the Palestinian Authority today are terrorists. We call them what they are. They have no interest in finding an accommodation. They have no interest in making life better for their own people. They're simply seeking to remain in power. And were any deal to be cut, and you can prove this, right? 4 times the Israelis have offered reasonable deals. 4 times those deals have been rejected. They have no interest in finding an accommodation. And until that time, we are where we are. You got to keep the lid on, and you can hope you can find a way to get to the Palestinian people to convince them that they too can have a better life, but not with these knuckleheads. It's great, by the way, not to be the Secretary of State anymore, because I couldn't say that when I was. That'd be bad form.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Secretary.
Hi.
My name is Daniel Levy. I'm a student at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Prescott. As a former director of the CIA, I was wondering what your position is on the line between transparency versus secrecy for protecting national security.
Yeah. I can't answer in the abstract where the line is. There are things that you shouldn't know. There's things that I'm now out of government. There's things that I should not know. They are absolutely imperative to conduct American national security. That has been true since time immemorial. There are many things that is perfectly fine if you know and ought to be transparently disclosed. It's too long a discussion about how we classify things. We get it wrong a lot. But I will say this in today's environment, and many in the conservative movement might disagree with me. However that decision is made by the institution that makes that decision, it has to be respected. It can't be the case that everybody gets to decide what gets, it can't just have I was a young soldier, some lieutenant decide, you know what, I think it'd be appropriate if this was out in the Washington Post. We have rules, we have institutions, we have processes, we can fight it out. We can make arguments. Congress can pass laws about what should, all of those are fine. But you can't have individuals hanging on to documents and letting them out. And people should, and if one does that, if one violates the promise that they made, I can't tell you how many documents I signed saying I would protect classified information. Well, when you violate that, by the way, if you do it in error, sounds good, turn the stuff back in, get on with your life. But you can't choose, we can't have 1 million soldiers or 20,000 CIA officers deciding which things should be public and which should not. The process has to work. Yeah. Here's the last thing I'll say about this. I've been at the center of lots of these. So I was on the Benghazi committee. It's the first time I met Hillary Clinton. I wish it had been the last. She had classified information on her server, and she did it knowingly and intentionally. That's just wrong for a senior leader to do that. And she walked away largely scot-free. That's equally wrong. what happens, it's not that anything on there created any enormous amount of risk, but it creates risk in your trust in these institutions. And this is the central risk for overclassification, not just in the intelligence community, but more broadly. You have to have confidence that decisions are being made in a way that is not political, small p, political. You have to have confidence that people are making these decisions about the things that we do and how we do them in a way that is aimed at making America better. And when you lose that, my predecessor at the CIA, a fellow named John Brennan, you can boo, it's all good. I mean, he had deeply politicized that institution. And my mission set wasn't to make the CIA conservative. It wasn't to respond in kind. It was to make the CIA excellent at doing counterintelligence operations and intelligence collection and running covert action operations around the world. There's no politics in that. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican or Democrat. You just got to be really good. And the risk that you all will take that authority away from the next CIA director because it has been politicized is very real. And so as leaders, we have to make sure that we are handling this transparency issue in a way that justifies the continued existence of these institutions that have to operate in the dark. Does that answer it, at least in part?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
This is going to be our last question. It'll be coming from a supporter.
Hello, Mr. Secretary.
Hi.
My name is Mike Hardiman. I'm an oaf and old American for freedom. And my question is, the Iraq invasion, was it a mistake?
Oh, I don't spend any time thinking about that. I'll be that most honestly. I mean,
Secretary, that was $3 trillion.
No, I understand. It's also history. I spend all my, I must say, I can't tell you what was in the moment. I think in good faith, some of them believe this mattered. I try not to second guess Democrats, Republicans, or anybody else because I wasn't there. I don't know what all they knew about what was going on in the world at that time. As we stare at it from outside, I was outside. Yeah, it was probably a mistake. And we've certainly got the execution wrong in 2011 and 2012 as well. Fair enough. But the only reason to ever think about something like that is to take a lesson learned away from it, right? That would be a reason. But mostly what we should focus on is, how do you take care of an Iraq today where the Iranians are largely in control? And you could say, that doesn't matter. I don't want to have anything to do with that. Fair enough. There are many in our party that think that. There's some on the left that believe that as well. I would tell you that if Iran gets control of Baghdad in its entirety, you will have nuclear proliferation throughout the region that will threaten your life, that of your children and grandchildren. These things, you know, somehow there's this notion that what happens in Kyiv stays in Kyiv. It's just not my experience set. My experience set that these things that happen around the world actually have second and third order implications, maybe not for tomorrow or next week or even next year, but they're very real. It's why we were so careful. I'm trying to think. I can't think of a place we deployed large numbers of American troops during our 4 years. And I also can't think of a place we didn't enhance deterrence. You can do both of those things at the same time. And we were pretty darn successful at that. I'm really proud of the fact that we didn't send the 101st every place and always as our first line of defense. But I must say, you know, I've read all the history. I've read the history of the 73 war, the 67 war in Israel. I've read the history of Iraq. I know the history of South Korea. I was a student and still remain so. What we should really think about is, tell me what's taking place in the environment today that could cause us to not have the capability to protect America from the very real threats that we have today. And so, you know, you have this kind of parlor game about some of these. Well, do you think we made the right decision in World War II not to get in until Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, right? They are interesting questions, and they can help us think about problem sets. But I hope we're spending like 0.04% of our time thinking about those, and 99.99% thinking about how is it that I make sure that we never have to go deploy our forces anywhere again. That is victory for American security. Last thought. So thank you. That's a great question to end on. But I do want to end on this note. My wife jokes from time to time. By the way, she has two great jokes now. She said, "Don't worry, Mike. There's still 5 more elections before you're Joe Biden's age." But she'll also say, Mike, sometimes you get in front of an audience like this and people can get down because you talk about hard problems and bad things and risk and all the dark corners of the world that you spent time in. And so they walk out of the room and like they have to pop a Xanax or like, or have a stiff drink, or worst case, both. Bad idea. Bad idea. You should know, I look out in this room and I am very confident that no matter which problem set we talk about, we're going to fix it. We're going to get it right. I'm not confident of that. You should know I'm not confident of that because of who the next president will be. I'm not confident of that because of who the next United States senator from your state, or I'm confident because in the places that really matter, in our churches and our synagogues, in our schools, I watch the American people, young people across the country, taking back power, taking back control. I watch parents taking back control. These are the places that have made America great. We've had some fantastic presidents, but what's really delivered for America for 250 years didn't happen in Washington, D.C. It happened in the quiet places. It happened where the little platoons exist. It happened at Boy Scout troops and Little League fields and somebody who cooked chili dinner at church, whatever it might be. Those are the places that make America so unique and so special. And to your point about talking to folks about why America is so unique, there is no place in the world that communities come together in the way that communities in America do. And I see groups like this tonight coming together, coming to Washington for the special event, and I am more convinced than ever that America will stay at that. And when we do, we'll win, they'll lose, and America will get its next 250 great years. Thanks for giving me this chance, Governor. Thanks for letting me be here tonight. Bless you.